All right, so it's 2 o'clock and everyone's here. Hello. Uh, if you don't know me, I'm Andal and I am going to be moderating this diversity session. And I'm just double checking with our co-chairs of the committee, but it sounds like they got some personal emergencies, so they either are running late or may not be able to come at all. But thank you all for showing up. I think this is going to be a really cool, intimate session. One thing I would like to say, as I said in the chat, if you don't have that popped out, is that this webinar is going to be very interactive, and we're hoping that you guys can get involved in the discussion. So Cathy, our panelist here, is going to give a brief little overview about the Inclusive Graduate Education Network, and we'll field any questions. And then we'll kind of just have a conversation with her about inclusive communities. So everyone, all the attendees should be allowed to talk, so you'll be able to moderate your own muting versus unmuting when you want to speak. And if you can't speak, if you're in a place that has a lot of noise, feel free to just pop things into the chat, and I'll be constantly looking at that, or any of the questions if you want to submit anything. So that is all I have to say, but I would love to introduce Cathy Mader, who's a backbone lead of the Inclusive Graduate Education Network, which started out with physics, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's going to give us a little overview about that. So take it away.
So I will warn you all that I have a cold that is going away slowly, but I seem to, every time I start talking with the microphone, have to cough. So I will try to do my best not to do that in your ears, but I might mute myself every once in a while. I'm going to share my screen and go through just a handful of slides. Let's see if I can get this to work correctly. There we go. So hopefully what you see now is a slide, kind of brief outline of what I want to do today. So I wanted to share a bit of information about who IGEN is, what our vision is, our goals, what we're trying to do, and have a conversation with you about how we might be able to work together. So briefly, IGEN is the Inclusive Graduate Education Network. We are, as of 5 days ago, 1 year old. We are a network of 30 different societies and institutions, organizations, corporations, national labs, and a handful of individuals, all working towards increasing the participation of underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities in graduate education in the physical sciences. And in particular, we're working with the American Association of, the American Astronomical Society, the American Chemical Society, the American Geophysical Union, and the American Physical Society and Materials Research Society. So those 5 professional societies that are all affiliated with physical science disciplines. The Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences in Research, faculty at RIT and the University of Southern California, and then WestEd. And so those are our main project partners that are funded by the National Science Foundation to create IGEN and hopefully expand and do more creative things related to this project. And I'll describe those in a second. So as a group, we got together and defined our vision is to achieve equity for underrepresented groups in doctoral degree attainment in the physical sciences. And what was driving us, since we're physical scientists, is data. So we made this, we looked at the fraction of students who receive bachelor's degrees in the physical sciences and related sciences. So we included engineering and mathematics and computer science, and actually I think we even have biological sciences here. But those blue bars represent the fraction of the bachelor's degrees that are awarded to underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities in those disciplines. The red bars show the fraction of the PhDs awarded to those groups. And so in all the cases, the number of, the fraction of the degrees awarded at the PhD level is significantly lower than the bachelor's level. And so there's clearly something some things are not working right. The access to the programs is either not there, or they're just not persisting in the disciplines. And so we'd like to see that the fraction of PhDs being awarded to these groups is the same as it is at the bachelor's level. And then just for reference, the black numbers next to each of the bars tells you the actual physical number of degrees that would need to be awarded at the PhD level for the red bar and the blue bar to be the same height. And this is helpful because in some cases the numbers are reasonably small. So for example, all we need is 6 astronomy degrees, PhDs awarded to racial and ethnic minorities in a single year would make the bachelor's and the PhD level equal. And physics is only 36 more to make this match. On the other hand, chemistry needs 112. And so there's just more degrees awarded in some of the disciplines. So that was what was driving us. Because we're a part of the NSF program, the Includes program, which is working to increase access and broaden diversity in STEM career paths, we realized that we wanted to do 4 things, not just, it wasn't enough to just increase the number of students that were getting degrees, but we also realized that there's more to it than just getting them into the programs and hoping that they graduate. We will also want to make sure that they're thriving while they're there. And so we realized that there's an element of transforming the institutions so that the students are making it through the programs. Another piece is we also want to just change the practices so that IGEN doesn't necessarily need to be there in order to increase the access and get the students into the graduate programs. And I'll talk to that a little bit more. So our 4 goals are, based on that previous graph, to get more of the students into graduate programs and to get make sure that they're earning the degrees. We want to identify and catalyze the adoption of evidence-based inclusive practices, things that transform the institutional practices so that students are successful. We want to conduct research that help us understand what those effective practices are, and then make sure that we do it in a way and disseminate our results in a way that institutions can change and adopt those practices. And then we want to build partnerships throughout the whole pipeline of the student experience, from undergraduate through graduate school and into their first career, so that they have the right networks in order to be able to succeed, but also so that those organizations throughout the pathway are all aware of the inclusive practices and they're all playing a role in making the changes to the system so that everyone can succeed. We based our work, as we heard earlier, in the physics programs. So the American Physical Society started it shows there in 2013, they pursued NSF funding to create what they called the APS Bridge Program. It was based on models that specific academic programs institutions had, and they were programs that were striving to recruit underrepresented racial and ethnic minorities and women in physics, women as well, to apply to graduate school. And what they were doing was not, people are recruiting the students to apply to graduate school all over. What the bridge programs did was the APS Bridge Program did was to look at students who, for whatever reason, weren't getting into graduate school through the traditional pathways. And in many cases, it was that students didn't necessarily apply. They were perfectly valid, great candidates for graduate school, but didn't realize what graduate school was, and that they would be great candidates for it and that they should be applying. And by the time they recognized that this was a viable pathway for them, it was too late in the process to get in. There are other students who applied but didn't necessarily apply wisely. So it's just like when you're applying to, I have children applying to college right now, and while they want to apply to places like Harvard, MIT, and USC, we also warn them that you should think broadly and have a variety of schools that you apply to. And if you're not advised carefully, you might not apply to the wide range of schools that you need to make sure that one of them is a good fit for you. Often, one of the stumbling blocks in that case for the students who aren't applying to enough different schools is that it costs too much money for them, and they don't realize that they can actually often get those admissions fees waived or application fees waived. So there's a whole host of reasons why a student might not apply at all, or might apply but not wisely, or may not actually finish the application. Something may go wrong. So there's a whole host of reasons why these students weren't getting into graduate programs, and through a lot of very deliberate network building, the American Physical Society Bridge Program was finding ways to find these groups of students who were great candidates for graduate school, recruit them into an applicant database that we then shared with these bridge programs that were created, and those students then got into graduate schools, or many of them did. And then over time, we've managed to, at this point in the game this last year, I think we had 100 graduate students apply through the APS Bridge Program portal, and 41 of them are now starting graduate school this fall. And if you remember the numbers, 36 was enough to reach parity. So we're now at the point within physics, after 7 years of doing this, where we've actually closed the gap in the sense that we have as many students starting, or the fraction of students starting their PhD programs from underrepresented groups actually matches the fraction that are receiving bachelor's degrees in physics. The other thing that's really exciting for us is that the persistence rate for these students is actually higher than the traditional graduate student persistence rates. Right now, in the first year or two, it took some working the kinks out to figure out how everybody was doing things. It took a while for the bridge programs to identify the inclusive practices that were helping to help students succeed in their first few years of graduate school. But at this point, the persistence rate is 87%. And so we're actually graduating at a higher rate than the traditional programs are. And so what we want to do is replicate that process. And so what we want to do is expand our program. Chemistry launched their first bridge programs this year. They have 2 bridge sites, and they have a couple of things that are programs that are called bridge partner sites. There's some small logistical details that make them different, but they basically have 6 academic programs now that are recruiting students through the chemistry application portal that is running just like the physics one. We'll see this year we're gonna repeat the process, so they're gonna expand and have more academic programs participating, and they're also gonna recruit more heavily for the students to participate through the program. So the applicant database of students that are trying to come into the system are also going to go up. In addition to that piece of the program, our research team is working on identifying and disseminating inclusive practices that are effective and helping those students succeed at higher rates. Our philosophy is if we can identify the institutional practices that make the bridge students experience more positive and helps them to thrive while they're in graduate school, that those are likely to affect every student in a positive manner. And so we found very few departments who don't want to learn this. And so it's great because we're finding a huge number of people wanting to participate in some way, shape, or form. One of the new and novel pieces for the physics program is our first graduate students in physics are finally graduating. So as I said, the program's just starting its 7th year. And so the first 2 bridge students graduated this past summer. But we're going to slowly get more and more of these students graduating. And so we realized that maybe what the next step might be is working on the next step in their pathway. And so where do they go after grad school? They'll go to a variety of places, but one place might be to get a postdoctoral appointment at a national lab. And there are some inclusive practices that those national labs may want to adopt in order to help those students make the transition smoothly and then thrive when they start their postdoctoral experience. So we also have, at this point, it's actually more than 16 national labs that are partnering with us, but this slide is a little old. We're also working with private sector employers, although that's a little more challenging because they all have different HR practices. So trying to work on how do you implement inclusive practices there is a little more challenging, but we're still working with them. One of the other things that's helping us to broaden the network and share those inclusive practices with more people is that we have a variety of opportunities for folks to come on board. And so this picture that you see here was the American Physical Society last year ran what was their last APS Bridge national meeting. And now those meetings have gone away, and the IGEN team is now going to be running national meetings for the community as a whole, not just for physics. And so this is a picture of the IGEN the Bridge APS Bridge National Meeting last year, which had about 150 to 200 people at Stanford. Many of those folks in that picture are graduate students who are part of the APS Bridge program, and many of them are faculty and researchers in industry and national labs who are mentoring some of these students. And all of them are there trying to learn learn more about ways that they can transform their institutional practices in order to make them more possible for the students to thrive. And so, last piece. So as I said, IGEN is actually going to have their national meeting. This is what's keeping me up at night, is trying to get this one organized. But we're trying to have our national meeting in Orlando in a month and a half, where we'll try and bring together once again cohorts of students that are pursuing graduate degrees in the physical scientists with professional scientists in order to learn more about ways that we can partner with each other and build stronger networks, as well as look at ways in which the IGEN program can work with these different groups in order to make the programs work more smoothly. And with that, I would be happy to answer questions about any of the pieces of the project you might have questions about.
Yeah, so I got a question from Avital about specifically the APS Bridge Program on whether or not it's done in collaboration with the graduate school programs.
So what, I'm going to go to probably here. So there are two prongs to this process of having the bridge programs. And one of the pieces that we do is we have both physics and chemistry, both. The professional society works with the academic program. So for example, the graduate program at the University of, I got to remember one, Indiana, for example. So the University of Indiana's physics graduate program applies to the American Physical Society to be a part of this bridge partnership program. And so when they do that, they describe the ways in which they will do things like constellation mentoring of their graduate students. So what types of practices do they have in place to help onboard a student, to help them make the transition into graduate programs, the ways that they will support students while they're there, the ways that they'll that the faculty work with to develop mentoring programs so that the students succeed. And so they work through this. They basically write a proposal that says, these are the ways in which we will support the student that graduate students that we recruit into the program. When they do that, they become a partner site, as I got on the picture. So now we know that those departments will take have adopted inclusive practices, and we have some confidence that they will work with us to support the students while they're there. Then when a grad student applies through our application portal, we share that information with that graduate program, and they can now try and recruit those students. Once the students are there, we actually stay in touch with both the students and the academic programs, and the APS then watches make sure that the students are succeeding. They do a lot of checking in on a regular basis to make sure everything is moving ahead smoothly. And we also check with the graduate programs to make sure everything's working smoothly from their side. And then through that kind of constant progress monitoring, everybody makes sure that everything's working out and moving forward. And then, like I said, chemistry just started this year, but they'll be doing similar things. Does that answer your question?
Avital, I think
yes, it
that
does.
was yours. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the chemistry side of things, I know I get to read a little bit about the press release as an ACS member, and so I know there's, I want to say 6 official fellows from the bridge sites, and then one of our partners actually took on a student with their own funding, so
yep.
Which is really cool. Yeah.
So yeah, so one of the features of, at this point in the game, the difference between a bridge site and a bridge partner is that the bridge sites, back in 2013, when the physics community decided to do they actually obtained grant funding from the National Science Foundation to support graduate student stipends for the first few cohorts of bridge students that the departments took. And basically it was to do a proof of concept. Does this work? And our department's able to do the work needed to make this a successful program. Chemistry is in the same boat, right? So they actually also were able to get National Science Foundation funding to get the first few cohorts funded at a handful of bridge programs. And I think the total number of sites that the physicists were funding was in the end 6. What they discovered was that a whole host of the other institutions, these partner institutions, were also doing these, willing to do this, the work of transforming how they do things. And so they were doing all that work, and they were then pursuing their own internal funding to support the graduate students, right? Because they're part of the standard graduate student population. And so that's how we got to the point of having 39 physics departments. 6 of them had funding from the NSF at the beginning, and actually it's now over 40, I think it's 41. And now all 41 are funding the students internally with their own department funding. Chemistry has 2 that were getting grant funding from the National Science Foundation, but it also has 4 partners, and those 4 partners are using their own internal funding. It's a part of their traditional graduate student recruitment funding, and they're also supporting the programs.
Yay. So one other question we had from Grant was actually, what are some of those best practices of inclusion? And sort of where can we find the results being reported at?
So there are, right now, there are a variety of things. So there are a handful of reports that, papers that have come out. And the current best place to get things, because as I said, we're too young, and I haven't necessarily managed to get a website that is like the end all of all resources. But the American Physical Society's Bridge site actually does have some of the materials there. And so one of the things the American Physical Society's done is they've actually put together what they call an induction manual. And it's it's a notebook that, or kind of a how-to guide of the types of things a program might do to help the students in that transition phase. For example, we found a large number of the graduate programs didn't realize that, you know, if you've never had to rent an apartment before, when you start grad school and you show up to grad school that first day, you don't necessarily realize that you have to pay the first month's rent and the last month's rent. And you may not necessarily know how to do that, right? And so the induction manual actually helps the programs realize that they need to share this type of information with students who have never lived on their own before. It goes through a whole host of those types of things that are kind of through that transition piece, but then also the types of things and types of ways that you might mentor students while they're in graduate school to help them, like I said, make the transition and get used to what graduate school is all about. It also talks through things like how to develop good mentoring relationships in a variety of ways, and we refer to it as the constellation mentoring. It's not just mentoring them within a research, but it's also mentoring them academically and in their broader areas. So that's something that we have out there already at the American Physical Society. Another piece that's turned out to be a big piece, I think the end goal for many of us within IGEN is that we'd like to get to a place where we don't need 2 different mechanisms for finding the students who didn't make it through the traditional pathways, right? We'd like whatever becomes the official traditional pathway to be one that's actually accessible for all. And so our holistic review workshop program is one of the things that we're working on. What we're trying to do is transform the traditional graduate admissions practices, and so that when graduate admissions committees are soliciting information from the applicant and reviewing that information, they're doing it in a way that they are actually reaching all those diverse students. And they're actually evaluating them in ways that look at the whole student, as opposed to, for example, looking only for the students with the highest GRE score and then deciding from that subgroup which ones are the ones that they're going to admit. And so the holistic admissions review group is running workshops, training faculty on admissions committees on how to do this differently. And so our the end goal is that you actually don't have to have 2 different ways to get into grad school, right? That there's one pathway, and that all students will get in there. So that's another one. And as the project evolves, we've got a research team. So that research arm is also then gathering additional research. They're actually conducting research right now. And as that research gets finished, it will certainly go into peer review articles, but it will also get disseminated through all of our different society partners, newsletters and things of that type, and it will live on our website so people can get access to it.
Awesome. Thank you. I think this is a really good segue because the question that Jessica poses, if I can not scroll beyond that, is about sort of what are IGEN's kind of next plans if it's able to expand beyond sort of the physical scientists and the professional side societies you have now, and what are ways as a field, as graduate students, as like us who are listening in, can sort of support these inclusive efforts?
So one of the pieces of what we're doing is I'm going to go off on a slight tangent. My role in this project is the backbone lead, and what that means is that I basically provide that backbone of support that hooks all these different organizations and project elements together. And so part of my job is to pay attention to who's who and who's doing what, and then find ways that we can find synergies and also expand. So one of the pieces now that this year, what we're hoping to do, we've made it through 1 year and we've learned how to function and how to interact with one another while also launching the chemistry program. But through that process, we also had partnering with us, the American Astronomical Society, geophysicists were there, and so were the materials scientists. And what they did is watched how everything worked last year, and they are launching this year. So they will launch this year with bridge partnership programs. They will be trying to recruit students into the common application portal, and they will also be trying to place students then this spring. So that is, we're learning how to expand basically in this year. And our goal is to slowly spread the word and expand to more and more disciplines. And so we've already been talking to a variety of the engineering fields, computer science, mathematics, and I think those are our, life sciences less so, because it would take us, there are a lot of differences, and life sciences in some ways has a lot of different societies in which you can get into, or that are part of the life sciences. And so it's a little harder for us to figure out how to connect there. In some ways, engineering is the same thing, right? There's an engineering society for electrical and mechanical, and so you can't go to one place as you can with physics. So anyway, so we're starting slow. We're going to ramp up to 3 more organizations and societies this year. We might try and onboard 1 more organization or 2 next year, and we'll just slowly expand as our bandwidth allows, basically. Okay, there was a second question there, was beside how we're expanding. How can you guys help? I think one of the things that is, so I'm going to ask a question of you guys, because it's supposed to be a dialogue.
Yeah.
Are you guys graduate students? Are you guys finished with your graduate degrees? What type of audience do I have here?
So I'm a graduate student, and I know we've talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. How about the rest of you?
And then
I graduated a year ago.
Okay.
And mostly our network is made of, I think 60 or 70% is graduate students right now. And then the rest are postdocs and AAAS fellows and the sort.
Okay, so some of the things that you can do, I think, it feels like, well, a variety of things. One is to be aware that we exist, right? And as you find effective resources, that you share it with us. If there are practices at your institution that were amazingly helpful, let us know, right? If you would like to encourage your organization to participate in some way, shape, or form, right? It's always helpful to have more than just the professional society saying, institution X should be taking, going to the IGEN meeting and learning about becoming a bridge site and possibly becoming one, or they should participate in the holistic review workshops. So there's a way that you can kind of help pitch and make sure that your academic programs know about IGEN and are trying to participate in it. But helping us learn some things as well. So one of the things that some of the research that's been done in the teams that were working on the APS Bridge program, one of the things that seems to be an important feature for the graduate students thriving and well-being on the campuses that they're on has been whether or not there is some sort of a graduate student organization on the campus. So how do we connect to those organizations so that we make sure that either our students know about them or that the bridge partner sites are aware of the different organizations on their campus that may be of benefit to helping the students be supported while they're in graduate school. So if you are aware of things, can you let us know about those things? Can you help encourage people in your organizations? So one of the mentor training programs, so we are partnering with Simmer, which which also trains people on how to run workshops on their campuses that help train people to be better mentors to future researchers. And so there's a mixture of the curriculum that they've already developed and is just amazing, is designed to teach postdocs and senior grad students how to mentor undergraduates. And so if your institution's using that program, that's great. But if they're not, can you encourage them to do that? And those are ways that, and some of those trainings also help students realize how they can do a better job in that mentoring relationship with their mentor. So one of the things that I've discovered, or that the research mentor training community has discovered, is students who have been mentored by folks in that took the research mentor training curriculum programs persist and have a more positive outcome as future researchers. But one of the pieces that they've discovered is their mentor also, so a student who participates in the program to be a good mentor to an undergraduate, if they're as a graduate student, also ends up having a positive impact on their faculty researcher, because they then start developing their relationship with their mentor in a more positive way. And so there's this thing called up mentoring that comes from that. So how do we rely on folks like you to help us get these programs instituted in your campuses so that all the campuses are doing a better job of mentoring their students? Those are some things I can think of offhand.
Jessica had another question about holistic review practices on kind of what did those look like, and are there any kind of resources? Because I know there are stuff that you were talking about for Simmer for mentoring, but maybe for like a holistic practice standpoint.
So the holistic review program is something that it's currently not a published curriculum. It is something where there are workshops to teach folks how to do it. And so thus far, the workshops have typically, they're often workshops where you encourage a team to come from an academic institution and work through how to transform their process for doing graduate admissions to take into account holistic practices. And so some of the things that are there, as I mentioned earlier, is, how do you transform the process and the information you look at and the rubrics you develop to evaluate candidates so that you aren't relying on the traditional things that we all know that people rely on, which are your GRE scores and your graduate or your undergraduate GPA. And this is not relying on those things, and this idea of holistic review of applicants is not new to graduate work. At the undergraduate level, they talk about it all the time these days, and in that case, it's not the GREs, it's the SATs and the ACTs. And so we realize that there are biases that come about by using those, and what actually the APS Bridge team, or part of the APS Bridge team, so our project leader, Ted Hodap, and our research team and holistic review team of Julie Posselt and Casey Miller have a paper in Science that came out. I can't remember if it was January of 2018 or 2019. I think it was 2019, where they actually analyzed from a variety of, from the physics data, physics graduate student data that they were able to get a hold of, that basically looked at the correlation between GRE scores and success in graduate school, and there is none. So GRE scores are not necessarily predictors of success in a PhD program. So, but yet we still use them. So the argument that that paper helped to make was that we need to think more broadly. That's not the only thing that we should be looking at when trying to identify the first pass. Use it as a, it shouldn't be the first pass at identifying who is in your applicant pool. And so those workshops look at that. They help the faculty that are present think about what are the pieces that make what are the elements that make a strong candidate for a graduate program, and then how do we design a rubric that allows us to consistently review the applicants in a way that we get a diverse pool of candidates there and then select them. And so it's a process of about, you know, an entire day's workshop on working through the ideas of implicit bias as you're reading letters of recommendation. How do you identify that there are biases in those letters? We all have biases when we're writing them. And so as you're reading them, how do you deal with your own biases beforehand, and how do you deal with the possibility that the writer had biases that were implicit and inherent? And so how do you then take that into account as you're trying to evaluate the candidates? And so that's another piece of that workshop that those folks will be working through. They'll look at non-cognitive skills and how do you identify the non-cognitive skills that students may have and the ones that are helpful and beneficial for graduate success. And so there's like I said, there's a whole host of different aspects of the student beyond just GPAs and GREs, and they help the teams with some background information, but then they also help them spend time trying to develop their own rubrics so that they can do a better job when they go home and actually implement it in their next year's recruiting process.
Okay, cool. I was going to say, did you want to know, I guess, more from us in particular?
I would love to know if you have suggestions on things that we can do. So you guys are a video, I mean, I know you have these diversities once a month, every other week.
This is the first one.
Oh.
And so we haven't really settled on an exact schedule, but it probably is going to be quarterly.
Okay.
Versus like every couple months. Yeah.
You know, so are there ways in which, you know, beyond just this, but are there ways in which we can connect with and use you in some way to get more information out?
Oh, sort of like spreading the word about like the
Yeah.
Inclusive Graduate Education Network.
Yeah, or help us to make connections, you know. For example, if we have our national meeting announcement going out or our newsletter, is there a way that we can share that with you guys so that you could then share it with people in your local area or within your organizations?
Yeah, I think that's totally feasible. We have several channels in which we communicate with a lot of our members and also spread the word kind of to folks in sort of our communities. So
It's also, I'd love to chime in on that. I mean, we easily can throw in, I mean, Annabelle is also involved in our communications committee, not just our diversity committee. So
yeah.
so she's definitely aware of what, you know, the activities we do. There's also, we do have our newsletter. We do have social media. It would be very interesting to see if there are ways that, you know, if you wanted, that we can compare and see where you have programs that are in the same campuses as are some of our chapters. Mm-hmm. And whether at least just facilitating introductions to know that everybody know that one group that's interested in better policy or in policies that relate to science, both internally and on the government's level, you know, that they exist and that there perhaps is room for dialogue and for collaborations on that level.
I think that would be spectacular. So a question for you that's so you say you have chapters on a variety of campuses. So we're still working on it. We're gonna, at one point, we will have like a beautiful map on our website so people can click and go through as opposed to just seeing it in my PowerPoint. But for example, how many campuses do you have chapters on?
Oh gosh, I don't know if there's an actual number
Well,
that we've counted.
I think we're around 30 plus
Okay.
at this point.
Okay.
So so there's got to be some overlap with at this point in the game, with the large number of between physics and chemistry and such. I feel like there's bound to be some overlap. So that would be really helpful to know that, right? And to share that with our group. So I would love to know that, and then be able to, if we are going to host a holistic review workshop at Iowa, then let you know that, right? And that would give you an opportunity to encourage folks to participate. And often when those workshops happen, they have two pieces to it. One piece is kind of an introductory description of a lot of the background information, some of the stuff around the implicit biases and all that, before they start working on their rubrics, and those are open to the campus, right? So now you guys could be a part of that. But for example, we're going to have our meeting in Florida. And one of the pieces of the meeting is to try and get as many mechanisms for networking as possible, right? And so one of the things I'm going to do is there are going to be 2 panel sessions on this meeting. One is going to be for graduates. We're going to try and get senior graduate students who are coming to our meeting already that are part of the Bridge program, but also probably from other locations, to be on a panel to talk about life as a grad student and what is it like for the other part of our audience is going to be first-year grad students who have been there for a month and a half, right? So giving them a chance to ask questions about what it's like. What was it like in your 4 years as you've been, or 4 to 5 or 6 years as you're progressing through graduate school, and how did you navigate these different pieces? We'll also have another panel where with folks in a variety of different early career stages. Hopefully early, but some of them will probably be different. But we'll look at those folks who have already graduated. So people who are in national labs, academics. And so you guys that have already graduated, some of you have some of you done policy fellowships?
Yes, some of us have.
Sorry,
yeah. I don't want to.
It's tough, especially.
Sorry, I'm a AAA fellow, and I was just waiting.
I remembered that I had heard that earlier that some of you had. So, you know, this is a great chance to talk about a different pathway through your career. And whether, you know, do you do that right after you get your graduate degree? Is it something you do later in your career? Right. So all of those different things are things that we'd love to share. So as I know where you guys have chapters, I might be able to tap into you as possible panelists on my panels, right? Or possible speakers at the meetings. So I think this is a great way for me to find a whole new group of people to tap, as opposed to always my traditional network. So this is great. If you guys don't mind being tapped in that way.
Yeah, I was actually going to comment because I know one of the Chemistry Bridge sites is UW-Madison. There is a chapter up there that is arranging and hosting the second annual Science Policy Symposium in November. Yeah.
So and I'm trying to remember if physics, I feel like physics might have a partner site there, but I'm not absolutely certain. I feel like they do. Yeah. So I think that would be a great thing too.
Can I just jump in? So I'm Grant. I'm at UW-Madison, part of the one of the NSPN chapters here. Kind of the irony is we definitely have, one of our weaknesses as a group is we're very biologically focused, and we're trying to branch out to chemistry as well as physics. We have a few chemists now in our organization, but you know, that's one of our challenges as a science policy group. We really want to reach out to other organizations or other fields within the campus. Yeah.
And to be honest, it's not a surprise because by sheer volume, those two disciplines are significantly bigger than physics, right? And so just the number of people you have to work with is larger. And so it's not a surprise to me that you have more people in your organization that are in those disciplines. You know, I think there's a whole host of, you know, as you do your meetings, is there an opportunity for, do you interact, and not even if with your meetings, just the fact that you are graduates, if you're graduate students now, you are running into and encountering undergraduates, and are there ways that you can help, to be honest, literally just tell that undergraduate that has potential the value of being a graduate student and getting a PhD and going to graduate school. And actually I have to be careful about that, because for my geoscience colleagues, they said actually a graduate degree in geosciences is actually kind of the common place to end. And so going on to graduate work of any flavor in the physical sciences, having somebody encourage you to do that is really powerful. I'll be honest, if I hadn't had a faculty member in my senior year in March hound me massively about going to graduate school, I would not have done so. So, you know, 20 some odd years later, as a faculty member here, I would not be here if it hadn't been for him coming in saying, what are you doing next year? And then when I said, I don't know, he hounded for a long time. And that's why I'm here, had it not been for him. And as one of the interesting things is I talked to the, as the IGEN leadership group is interacting with each other more and more, a significant number of the folks that are part of IGEN have similar stories, that there was, you know, their family knew nothing about what graduate work was about, or they didn't think it was something they could afford, they didn't think it was something they wanted to do. And then somehow there was one person who gave them that one nudge that made them, or in my case, a giant push that got them to go to graduate school. And now, wow, life is great. So that one person giving that caring moment of sharing information that made a student choose, right? You guys can do those kinds of things because you're closer in age to those undergraduates. So if you can help make them aware of the value of that graduate education and the accessibility of that graduate education, because you know, graduate education is not the same as undergrad. You're not necessarily paying for it. Sometimes you are, but not always. And so what are the pathways through that you could go through that are affordable, that actually lead to a career that is rewarding, and rewarding not just emotionally and socially, but also going to pay you well and make it viable. So those are other things that you guys could help with, is actually reaching out to students.
Hi, this is Jessica. I'm one of the grad students on the call right now. I am at University of California, Davis, and wanted to ask a follow-up question. I'm in the ecology program, and we have been doing a lot of work to revise our admissions process and test out various ways to incorporate holistic review. We're sort of the leading edge on our own campus, and I'm wondering if you know of other resources or organizations that are trying to coordinate across programs to share these types of holistic review practices and principles. We've looked at different places like the Vanderbilt-Fisk Bridge Program. The University of California Presidential Postdoc has a pretty robust way of analyzing applicants for holistic review criteria. But we're sort of in this place of not knowing where else to look for examples.
So
Evidence that they are moving in the right direction or not. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So you should send me an email, and I will send you some more information too. As I said, one of the leads on our holistic review efforts and also on our research team is at the University of Southern California, and it's Julie Posselt. She's literally written the book on diversity in graduate education. So she's amazing. And she and Casey Miller, the other lead on the holistic review program, have an NSF grant called Seasides, which is working with a bunch of the University of California system institutions on developing holistic review practices. And so in this October meeting, I believe there will be, I can't remember, I think she told me 4 folks from her Seasides group joining the workshop and coming to learn how to basically be trained as trainers for their own campuses and for the California school systems to implement holistic review on their campuses. So I don't know if UC Davis is involved, but I'll certainly check into it. And if not, I can connect you. I'll see if I can get some kind of either a website or some sort of more information about what Seasides is, just so that it might be that other disciplines on your campus are involved in Seasides and you don't know about it, but maybe there aren't. But anyway, I'll try and connect you, because I know it's all focused on California schools. And then another effort that's going on, I'm trying to remember what they're called. There is another program in the California school systems that's kind of a bridge program model. And it is only physics, and it's Cal Poly is leading the effort on that. And they are looking at encouraging students from various California and California state system undergraduate programs to pursue graduate degrees in the various UC system schools as well. And they're not talking about holistic review there. That's more of the bridge program and literally mentoring undergraduates into graduate programs in their system. And I can connect you with that group as well. And I think many of those institutions are a part of the Seasides program. So those are the things I know going on in California that might be useful and local and easy to help you guys connect to.
Awesome, thank you. I'll follow up over email.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a quick aside, because I was looking at the conference website. And so there's also you were mentioning how most of this is just workshops. So there's a workshop at the IGEN meeting.
Yes.
Or sort of, yeah, okay.
So that IGEN meeting is 2.5 days long, as it says. For the professional scientists that attend it all day Saturday, there is effectively the entire holistic review workshop that would normally be held at an academic institution. They will go through that whole thing throughout the course of that Saturday event. And it's going to be structured a little bit more freeform and in order to allow folks to move back and forth between some of the other IGEN sessions that we'll be having, because we're going to have a couple on climate and how to improve a chilly climate on your campus, how to, bystander training, some of the some things on recognizing a student in distress. So a variety of things for faculty to do, for the chemists in the group, individual development plans, all of those types of things are kind of effective practices that we want folks to be aware of. But so they're kind of be able to move between those two things if they'd like. But there's also a subgroup of participants will be able to apply to become part of this Train the Trainer program so that they can implement holistic review workshops on their own campus. And so that subgroup will have additional activities. In addition to participating in the holistic review workshop, there will be a few Friday afternoon and Sunday morning activities that basically help them develop their own toolkit to run these workshops on their own campuses. And so that's where the Seasides team, I know, is sending 4 people to be a part of that Train the Trainer program. So they'll participate in the IGEN activities on Saturday, but they'll also have some things bookending that activity so that they can then be trainers and run their own programs at their own institutions.
Were there any more, I guess, comments from you, questions from you, Cathy, or anyone else in the attendees?
So how do I learn what campuses you have chapters on?
I think that could be
website
like
somewhere?
a follow.
Or is that just you and I email with each other? Here, I'm going to actually
Let me
stop
look real
sharing
quick.
my screen. You guys don't need to look at my screen this whole time.
I don't know if we have a list of specifically individual groups, but I'm happy to touch base with you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And if there are, you know, if there are members that are in the Florida area and you can see a way that they may, if they want to contact me and are willing to be tapped as a resource during that meeting, I would love to learn who's there and see if there's a way that either they can be a part of our networking fair and chat with the students there, or be a part of one of our panels and tell them about your organization, but also about their life path.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds great. And I was going to follow up anyway with information about the symposium we're going to have in November. That's
Okay.
at Madison, so that way
Yeah.
you can touch base with
Yeah, I would love to share that with the Madison team or the Madison campuses and see if there's a way that, just so that they share the information with their students.
Okay, that's good. Well, if there aren't any follow-up questions or comments, I did want you to go ahead and do a quick just reiteration of your email, because I know it was on all your slides, but just so everyone has it.
It is cmader@igenetwork.org.
Yeah. And with that, I have just one final announcement, just as a heads up for the NSPN members. For another webinar that's later on this month. It's on September 19th, 3 p.m. Eastern, and it's actually going to be about state level policy fellowships. Where are the opportunities, what's the progress, and ongoing efforts. So save the date for that. But other than that, thank you so much, Cathy, for talking with us and telling us a little bit more about IGEN. And yeah, so it was great to have you, and I will follow up with you afterwards.
Thank
It
you.
was
very
great to
much.
meet you all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good one, everyone.
Bye.